My name is Germ. This is Germ Warfare, the Battle of Ideas, and going to be chatting about Ivamectin, Tess Lawrie, and she's South African, which is going to work very well with my audience. Hello, Dr. Tess Lawrie. Where in South Africa are you from originally?
Well, I moved around quite a lot. I was born in Durban and I lived there for 17 years, and then I went to Wits to study my medical degree. And then I moved down to Cape Town. Actually, I did a PhD at Wits as well. And then I moved down to Cape Town and was there with my family, and I worked at Stellenbosch, in Tygerberg Hospital for a bit, and had 3 kids, and then we moved to the UK in 2009. Well, I established this company in 2013, and you can imagine for any doctor who's clinically practicing, they don't have time to read the journal papers that come out every single day. I mean, there's hundreds of papers that get published weekly. There's so many journals, and it's very difficult for them to make sense of current practice, because medical practice is changing all the time. So what they do is they rely on clinical practice guidelines.
Yeah.
So these are guidelines made by the health regulatory bodies or the health authorities like the World Health Organization. So those guidelines rely on what's called evidence synthesis, which is kind of making the proof that underpins these clinical practice guidelines. So my company is engaged in doing that. So what we do is we do a literature search to search for all studies on a particular topic, and then we choose the studies that are of the highest quality. So a lot of clinical research is based on, clinical guidelines are based on randomized controlled trials, but not always. So we will evaluate all the randomized controlled trials. We'll assess them for risk of bias on a particular topic, for example, and then we'll synthesize that. So that involves, and if it's meta-analysis, which is another big word, meta-analysis is just the pooling of data from different trials. But basically, for any, just say you want to look at Ivamectin and its deaths compared with not receiving Ivamectin, well, you can take the data from all the studies that have looked at that, have recorded those data, and you put them in the same analysis. And so you'll get each study listed with the data that they've contributed to the analysis, and then you get a summary total at the end, which shows you the overall effect of Ivamectin on death.
All right. So what you do is you kind of look at data, analyze it, and then present it in a way that's digestible.
Yes. So we'll have all the, and we also assess the certainty of each of the evidence for each outcome. So, and then we'll put it together in a document and present it to, or either put it in what's called a systematic review. So we'll manuscript and get it published somewhere as a systematic review, or we'll put it in a framework. Now, a framework is just a document that has different headings, and each heading is populated, so with a paragraph or 2 or 3 or pages or whatever with evidence. So for guideline frameworks or guideline development frameworks, we usually look at the effect of an intervention, so the effect of Ivamectin. We will look at how people value the outcomes associated with Ivamectin. For example, Ivamectin reduces deaths, so people will value that outcome. That's quite an important outcome. And we will look at the resources associated with it. So how much does it cost? Is it cost effective? We will look at whether it's acceptable to people, whether it's feasible, and also equity. Now, equity is something that people don't really understand. It's a funny word. And what it means in relation to health is that, is it a fair intervention? Is it something that everybody can access easily? Is it, does it help the vulnerable as much or more than the privilege and so on. So
obviously,
all of that.
Obviously, the cynical listeners will say, okay, that's all fine and well. Who's funding you? Do you have political interest? That kind of thing.
So my company it's actually, I've never really needed to advertise for work. I've always done work for nonprofit organizations, and I think maybe I'm too cheap, but but I never advertise, and always have more work than I need. The work that I've done on Ivamectin, I haven't actually I didn't have funding for. I just did it off my back because it looked interesting to me, and I thought, well, let me have a look at this. I never thought it would take this long to communicate the message to the authorities, because I thought I would just do it to give them a bit of help to get started to look at the evidence. So it's taken a long time because they seem to think there isn't enough evidence, and it's taking time to communicate that message to them.
What is ivermectin?
Okay, well, ivermectin's it's a medicine that's been used to treat parasitic infections for 40 years. It was discovered by Professor Satoshi Omura in the 1970s. I think it was discovered on a golf course, actually. He was taking soil samples and looking for new drug potential in soil and bacteria and whatever. Anyway, he found this bacteria that had this substance and they called it Ivamectin, and he reached out to a chap, I think it was his name, William Campbell, in Ireland, who was working for Merck, and so together they actually developed Ivamectin. And started using it for, and it was discovered to be very effective for onchocerciasis, which is a worm infection common in the tropics. So Merck tried to make it make financial sense, but couldn't, because the people who needed the medicine were the poorest of the poor, and they couldn't get their basic $3 a treatment or whatever out of it. So after thinking about how they could make a profit and realizing they couldn't, they donated this medicine to humanity and gifted it, and it was a wonderfully humanitarian thing to do, and I think they got a lot of kudos from that. They were always considered to be the company with sort of higher ethics than other pharmaceutical companies, because the pharmaceutical industry doesn't have a good reputation in general. So after that, so you were saying, what is it? So subsequently, it's been studied again, looking at various viruses, so Zika, dengue, even flu viruses and HIV. It's been looked at against various viruses, and it's found to have activity against these viruses, and it's also found to have anti-inflammatory properties. And there's also evidence that it might have anti-cancer properties. So it's a very interesting medicine, and the more that it's studied, the more one realizes that it needs to be studied more. There need to be more trials.
And why is it so controversial?
Well, it's a very cheap medicine. The WHO looked at it in 2018 for scabies, because it's an essential medicine on the WHO's list of medicines. And in the scabies document, they estimated its cost at 3 cents per tablet. That's American cents. So it was like $3 for 100 tablets. And you'd use like 2 or 3 tablets a person. So just say 2 tablets a person, you're talking about like 6 cents for a whole treatment. So it's unbelievably cheap. And the COVID pharmaceutical industry is worth $100 billion.
Yes.
So, you know, you've got little Ivamectin there standing,
Right.
you know, standing up saying, hang on, you know, I can do it. I can do all of this. I can treat, I can prevent, and all the other options from the pharmaceutical industries are much more expensive and
Right.
less tested in terms of safety. So it's a big threat to the pharmaceutical industry.
It's got nothing to do with money, Tess.
Well, I think it has thing to do with money.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Animals use the injection. There's no injectable option for humans. Humans take an oral tablet, and it's it's 0.2 milligrams per kilo. It's basically the standard, similar dose to what you would use for scabies or worms, or and there's different, there's different regimen for prevention or treatment. If you're using it for prevention, in India, in some places they use it monthly, for healthcare workers.
So it's a prophylactic.
Yeah, as prophylaxis. They take it monthly, whereas in the States, for example, the prophylactic regimen that's recommended by Pierre Corey's group is twice every 2 weeks. So yeah, it seems to have a very broad therapeutic range. So, and it's very safe. So there are many different protocols being used around the world, and yeah, when I say it's safe, I usually refer to the Vigi Access database, which is a WHO Uppsala University collaboration, and on that database you can look up any medicine and you'll get however many registered deaths and registered adverse events, and ivermectin has probably about the lowest deaths and adverse events of anything that's been going for so long.
And yet the FDA hasn't approved it for COVID-19, or am I wrong?
No, the FDA doesn't approve it, neither does the NIH, and there was a statement on Monday by the European Medicines Agency saying that it's not recommended. They recommend against it there's insufficient evidence and so on. So they're all the health authorities are saying the same thing, and in fact they usually cite the same studies to defend their position as well. They're just not they're not looking at all the evidence. They usually cite instead of for example citing our systematic review and meta-analysis, they'll cite a single JAMA study that was published about 2 weeks ago now, that was done in mild disease in Colombia, and
yes.
it showed
I saw that.
So they'll and that study had a number of serious problems, including conflict.
They also changed their goal, their end goal, I think, if I got it correct.
So they changed their as you say, their outcomes, and but there's been a lot of there's been a lot of discussion about that paper in the press. But it is funny. I even saw on the commission, the parliamentary commission in South Africa, I think it was the 17th of March, I saw that Professor Helen Rees cited that study too. So it seems like the authorities are citing the same very poor study.
Yes.
And so it does seem like something funny is going on,
Well, tell me about the science around ivermectin.
We did what's called a meta-analysis,
right,
of ivermectin versus controlled treatment, which could have been placebo or no treatment, and we found 21 randomized controlled trials. Okay, so when the authorities say there's no evidence, there were 21 randomized controlled trials when we did this meta-analysis. There are many more now, because there are at least 40 trials ongoing, and the data are coming in every week. So since we did it, there are at least 4 new trials that have published, and I've included one of those trials, the JAMA study I referred to earlier. I've included that in our latest analysis, and we are still extracting other studies. So we found 21 studies at that time. This is a month ago. And 18 of those were randomized controlled trials of treatment, and 3 were randomized controlled trials of prophylaxis, prevention. So 18 studies had compared ivermectin with something else for treatment of COVID, and 13 of those had looked at the primary outcome, which was the outcome we were most concerned about, which was death. Okay, so some of those were in mild disease and they hadn't found any deaths, and others were in moderate or severe disease, and overall there was a 2%. So out of all the studies that we have now in the analysis, there's 2,200 or 300 people who've participated in these studies. Half of them received ivermectin and the other half didn't. And there was a 2.2% risk of death if you got ivermectin, and there was around an 8% risk of death if you didn't get ivermectin.
Okay, so it reduced.
Yeah, so it reduced it substantially. So what it meant was basically if you're in a hospital where there was 9 deaths happening for every 100 people who were hospitalized, if they got ivermectin, 6 of those deaths wouldn't happen. So you get 3 deaths out of 100 instead of 9.
As a treatment. So in other words, during the sickness.
Yeah, as a treatment. So if you look at the prophylaxis studies now, if you only look at the randomized controlled trials of prophylaxis, there's 3 currently, and 738 people took part in these studies, and they were healthcare workers or they were family members of people who had COVID. And in that analysis, we got around 4%, and I'm just speaking off the top of my head now because I haven't got my analyses in front of me, but about 4% got COVID in the ones that got ivermectin for prophylaxis, and about nearly 30% got COVID if they were in the group that didn't get prophylaxis. Now, the authorities are saying that this evidence is very uncertain and is not good enough to recommend. But what you have to realize as well is that, and the studies get criticized for not being of good enough quality. Now, all of these studies were done in low and middle income countries, and they were done by doctors with no conflict, and many of them actually funded their own studies.
Right.
You know, so these studies, in my opinion, are of good quality and arguably better quality than some of those studies done by pharmaceutical companies that actually hold the data themselves. They do their own data analysis and then present their findings, and they've obviously got medical writers and so on. So these doctors who are busy trying to treat their patients and in Egypt and India, and so they're treating their patients, plus they're doing the study, plus they're writing it up so that they can inform the world of these findings. And oftentimes English isn't even their first language. They're getting no assistance to do so by the authorities that should be facilitating, this very valuable information data that they're sharing, and then they're being told their studies are for quality. What I wanted to say about Professor Schumann is he actually stopped it early because he could see the benefit that it was unethical to continue. He felt it was unethical because the people in the who weren't getting ivermectin were having a higher risk of infection, and we were in a pandemic. So the people who didn't get ivermectin in his study, I'm off the top of my head, we had it was 30% chance of getting COVID versus a 4% chance of not getting COVID. So a 4% chance of getting COVID. So he stopped his study early. Now his study's penalized for being stopped early and is considered low certainty. So low quality, or high risk of bias, I should say, not low quality. So there's just a lack of attention and proper evaluation by the authorities on around ivermectin, and it's costing lives. And the fact that they can just come out with a statement that is not properly referenced, and that they can then point to one study that suggests that there's no difference, when we all know it's meta-analysis, it's systematic reviews that underpin clinical practice guidelines, not a single study, or they all seem to point to the same sort of mechanism of action. There was one study done in Australia in March last year in monkey kidney cells, which suggested you needed very high doses to clear the virus, but also managed to clear the virus completely within 48 hours. But the emphasis has always been, oh well, you have to have very high doses, so ivermectin can't possibly work, because you need doses in humans that would be toxic, which is absolute nonsense. Because we know from clinical studies, you just need the ordinary dose, basically, that you give for scabies or worms, and it works. So this idea that, and as I say, they keep cherry picking studies to support their lack of action on ivermectin.
Yeah, and not just lack of action, but it appears that it's a lack of integrity and transparency.
There's total lack of transparency. You just don't know what studies they're referring to. You have to sort of unpick. I was asked to look at the Australian recommendations on ivermectin, and they don't present their forest plots. They just, you can't see how they calculated what they calculate, and what studies they've used. So. And it's the same with the EMA statement. They don't even reference the studies within the text of the document. They just list them at the end. So you don't really know what they're referring to substantiate their claims that their argument that it can't be used. And if you look at, if you just look at, like Pfizer, for example, was now in the saying that they've got a tablet that's going to that's looking very promising and going to be released and can be used at early stage of the disease by the end of the year. Now, there's a completely different approach from the media as well, in terms of what they're highlighting. I mean, have you ever heard the media saying a systematic review evaluated 21 randomized trials? So now we have one study by a pharmaceutical company that's being done. It probably won't even get published before the thing is authorized. So there's been this double standards by the authorities, where they've these emergency use authorizations for medicines which haven't even got a paper behind them, or an independent evaluation, or long-term safety data, or medium-term safety. And these medicines are being given emergency use authorization, and ivermectin is still sitting there and they're saying we need more evidence. Yes, as you say, there is a double standard that's being applied. Like, we need something urgently, and they will urgently allow, give emergency authorization to other medicines, but not ivermectin. Now, I think this is probably because in certain countries, and I'm not sure if it applies to South Africa or even the UK, but the emergency use authorization for many of the novel treatments are only applicable if there isn't an option, if there isn't another treatment option. So if ivermectin is safe and effective as it is, then I think the emergency use authorizations of many of the novel treatments would then be in question, and they would need to go through the normal regulatory process of actually proving first that the medicine is safe and effective, and then having to apply for regulatory approval, just like all other.
Yeah, but I mean, everything that is considered good science seems to have been suspended.
That many doctors have been using certain types the veterinary product, whilst waiting for other products to come in. But they would be using it in a diluted form according to a certain formula that they would know, and it would be orally, not injected. So I don't really know about that, but I don't know any of the details, but I do know that I have heard from doctors that has been their only option, and that it has been working.
In other words, taking the injectable orally.
Yeah, certainly it's not ever injectable in humans.
Yeah.
As far as I know. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Merck actually did the original safety studies, and they in 2002 they published a paper which showed that ivermectin was safe at 10 times the usual 12 milligram dose. They dosed up to 120 milligrams.
Sure, that's still safe.
So, you don't want. I mean, also I just have to say. My own position on taking medicine is that you don't need to take anything just for the sake of it. Obviously, there are people who are high risk and so on, and that's they can discuss with their doctors. But in my opinion, if you keep yourself healthy, so you eat healthily, which includes not eating sugar. Sugar is absolute. So you don't drink too much. You
preach it, sister.
You get your sunshine, and you take your vitamins, supplements, vitamin C, zinc now, especially during these times. I do not think one needs to take prophylaxis unless you're exposed to somebody with COVID, or unless you're a healthcare worker, or So I'm not taking anything. But if I was exposed, if I was working in a hospital, yes, then I would. And if I got COVID, I would want to take ivermectin. But I'm not at all suggesting that everybody should be taking ivermectin.
Of course.
I think the main thing, what you've got to do is look after your immune system. So everybody should be taking care of their immune system, and you do that by having a healthy lifestyle. I do think that people need to start taking responsibility for their health, and they need engaging in activities, and also dialogue around. You cannot outsource your healthcare to a government. You have to take personal responsibility, and I think if everybody took personal responsibility for their health, we wouldn't have these issues of diseases associated with sugar intake,
right?
Diabetes and heart disease and all those things.
Tess, sorry, you keep saying though, like if you get COVID, you take ivermectin, but COVID is a respiratory disease, very much like flu. Can ivermectin also work for flu, for example?
But I think that's the exciting thing about ivermectin. Now that we know that it has this broad antiviral activity, we can look at it against the normal flu. We can look at it against all sorts of diseases. I mean, hepatitis we don't hear. We've got people. The thing that I'm really interested in looking at is ivermectin for long COVID, because people with long COVID, there are many people with long COVID now, and there's nothing that they are given really that helps substantially, So I think we really need to look at these older repurposed drugs for long COVID, starting with ivermectin. Well, look, at the moment there's a major misinformation campaign against ivermectin. So I have no idea, who's going to win. I would say that it has potential to be widely useful, and if it is, that would be wonderful, because because it is such a safe medicine. So it would be great if we could find something, especially since, there's been this increased microbial resistance and this concern about us, antibiotics not working anymore. And also, we have this viruses seem to be on the increase, and these flus seem to be getting worse and worse. So if we could find something that's really safe, cheap, and effective, and equitable, because ivermectin is available for everybody, then that would be really wonderful.
Somebody's asking, how does it work? I mean, if it's an anti-parasite drug, what is it doing? Because we're dealing with a virus.
Well, it has a number of modes of action. So it acts in a similar way, it would appear, to in one of its modes of action, to vaccine, in that it blocks the viral proteins from entering the nucleus. So it protects the it prevents the proteins from damaging the immune response. It also affects viral replication by attaching or impairing the enzymes associated with viral replication. So it has a number of different ways in impairing the virus's action in the body. And then it also has this anti-inflammatory effect by dampening down the cytokine reaction, which is the inflammatory response to infection. So, which is why it seems to work early on in the disease really well, but it also works in severe disease. So, because usually the first 3 to 4 days, you've got the viral, the virus sort of replicating and going mad, and that stage. And we have evidence from Andrew Hill's review that it clears the virus much quicker. But then in severe disease, you've got less of the virus around now, but you've got all the effects of it with the inflammation and everything. And people who get it for severe disease also do better than if they. So it works at all stages of the disease, and I think the different mechanisms of action, are shown in that way. The other thing I wanted to say about ivermectin, and which is logical, is because it has all these different mechanisms of action, it's likely to work against various strains and variants. It's not going to be limited to a particular variant.
Oh, that's interesting. Yes, because vaccines are very much limited to particular variants or strains. Yes. Oh, that's fascinating. How does that work?
Well, it has its mechanism of action of stopping viral proteins. It's not
okay.
To a particular variant. So it makes sense that it would be able to act on various strains. You can find there are many protocols on, and you can look up the studies from India. There's studies but you can also look on the Bird document. There's a table with all the different protocols that are used around the world.
Yeah, and that's on your website. I actually saw it. He wants to know, how does weed respond to inflammatory responses like COVID or flu?
I have no idea, I'm afraid. Yeah, fear is very bad for health as well. I can just point that out. And so I think over the last year, people's health will even worse than before. So now there's no better time than now to actually say enough is enough, and I'm going to actually take care of myself and take responsibility for my own health and start engaging in acquiring the information and awareness around what is good for me.
What would you want people to know or to think about or to do going forward with regards to ivermectin?
Okay, I'd want them to know that it works. I would want them to realize they must, time has come to start questioning your authorities who are cherry picking the evidence to suit a narrative not to recommend ivermectin. And I've already said take care of your own health. And and get a life,
Yeah.
Get a life. You've got to start living, really. It's you can't let COVID take your life from you. You've got to start taking it back.
You've got a crystal ball in front of you. What do you see with regards to ivermectin going forward?
I think the authorities are not going to recommend it.
Sure.
So it's up to the people to demand it.
Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. It's a great conversation, and I hope that we're going to get lots more people interested in pushing back for all the right reasons.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Jeremy.
My name is Germ. This is Germ Warfare, the Battle of Ideas.